John Simmons had always feared hospitals. The sterile smell, the clinical ambiance, it all felt so unnervingly impersonal. However, a hernia demanded attention, and so he found himself scheduled for surgery. In the pre-op room, a nurse with a kind smile hooked him up to an IV. "The anesthesia will put you in a sleep-like state. You won't feel a thing," she assured. John nodded, but his anxiety remained palpable. Lying on the operating table, the anesthesiologist said, "All right, Mr. Simmons, count backward from 10. 10, 9, 8. John's voice trailed off, his world fading to black. He expected silence, a peaceful oblivion, but he found himself in a chilling realm of consciousness. He could hear the hum of machines, the rustling of surgical gowns, the low murmur of the surgeons' voices. Then came the sensation, a cold pressure against his abdomen. A whisper of dread curled in his mind as he realized he could feel the scalpel's edge slicing through his skin. A silent scream tore through his mind. His body remained immobilized. The pain escalated, a relentless, torturous tide. He could feel the meticulous prodding and probing inside his body, every tug and pull sending waves of unendurable agony. He strained against the paralysis, desperate to convey his torment, but his body betrayed him, lying motionless. The cruel irony was that he could hear his own steady heartbeat on the monitor, a treacherous reassurance to the surgeons that all was well. Throughout the operation, he remained trapped in his immobile body, forced to endure every horrifying sensation. The surgical team remained oblivious to his silent screams, their discussion on weekend plans a grotesque soundtrack to his ordeal. After an eternity of agony, the surgery concluded. The last thing he heard before the anesthesia's grip loosened was the surgeon saying, "Textbook operation. He won't have felt a thing." As the anesthesia wore off in the recovery room, the physical pain was a dull throb, but the psychological torment was fresh and vivid. He tried to explain his ordeal, but his words were dismissed as post-anesthesia confusion. After all, the monitors hadn't shown any signs of distress. John returned home with a scar on his abdomen and an unhealed one on his psyche. His once mundane life was now haunted by the echoes of his silent screams. The assurance of, "You won't feel a thing," held a new, horrific meaning. John Simmons survived his routine surgery, but in the unending silence of his anesthesia, he'd lived a nightmare that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His story serves as a chilling reminder of the horrors that can unfold on the boundary of consciousness, in the deafening silence of anesthesia. George Miller had nothing but trust for Dr. Eric Bunday, his surgeon. Dr. Bunday was a seasoned professional with a competent, patient manner, and George felt lucky to have found a doctor he could trust. "Nothing to worry about, George. It's a routine procedure. We are going to take good care of you," Dr. Bunday assured him. The anesthesia quickly took effect, and George slipped into unconsciousness. He dreamt of strange things, of sharp pain in his lower back, but dismissed it as a fragment of his uneasy mind. When he awoke in recovery, he was hit by a dull, throbbing pain, not near his abdomen, but at his lower back. Confused and drowsy, he reached back, feeling a fresh bandage there. "Why is there a wound on my back?" George asked a passing nurse. She frowned, checked her charts, and muttered something about a possible mistake. After a hasty examination, the nurse told George, "I'm going to talk with the doctor, but I think we're going to need to run a couple tests." They ran a few blood tests and took some x-rays. Several hours passed before a grim-faced doctor gave George the bad news. A kidney had been removed from his body. Horrified, George went straight to the police. "It was Dr. Bunday. He performed the surgery," he insisted. The investigation that followed was a nightmare. The hospital had no records of a Dr. Eric Bunday. No one remembered seeing him, and the surveillance tapes for the day of George's operation were mysteriously blank. George was dumbfounded. "But I saw him. He introduced himself as Dr. Bunday. I was in his office. There were pictures of his family on his desk." The authorities' investigation went nowhere. The man posing as a doctor had vanished without a trace, leaving George and several others in his wake, scarred and scared. George's routine surgery had turned into a horrifying experience. He was a victim of an organized crime operating in the shadows of the medical community, preying on unconscious, vulnerable patients. Haunted by the phantom pain of his stolen kidney, George's trust in the medical profession was forever shattered. The hospital, once a place of healing, was now a chilling reminder of a horrifying crime.